Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode with myself and Stephen, and another really interesting one, another one of Stephen's ideas. I'm going to stop mentioning it now because it's just, I don't know, what, 80%?
It's getting boring.
Yeah,
It's getting boring
yeah.
now.
So this one is simply called You Are What You Think You Are. Now, honestly, most of the time I know what Stephen's on about when he comes with these. We haven't talked about this. I have no idea quite what he means. So what the hell?
Let me shed some light. So, recently, there's been a lot of conversations in the media about anxiety and about the way people feel, and I'm quite confident that that's a link to what you think. And I think a lot of the time, anxiety is not formed by what happened in the past or even what's happening right now. Anxiety, a lot of the time, is what you think is going to happen. So you're worried about something that hasn't actually happened. And you are what you think you are is basically a statement to say, if that's what you think in your head, you almost convince yourself that's what you are and that's what's going to happen. And I would say a large percentage of anxiety is caused by things that actually haven't happened yet, that are actually in your control because they haven't happened yet, but you've convinced yourself that, you know, example, I'm just going to be really rubbish at that. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. I'm going to make a mistake. Someone's not going to believe me, and so on and so on and so on. And that's what causes the anxiety. So my thing today is it's about, if you are what you think you are, then think positively.
Yeah.
Think about, what will happen if it's successful, not what will happen if it's not successful. And we've talked about failure before, that actually sometimes we don't do things because of the fear of failure.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we don't do things because of what we're thinking. And just because you're thinking it, it doesn't make it right. This is the thing. And I somehow want to say this because I probably talk about this every single week to someone I'm mentoring, where they've convinced themselves about something that they've only thought about.
Yep.
It actually hasn't happened.
Yep.
And so in some cases, they've got no evidence whatsoever to even say, actually, this will happen. But because they've constantly been thinking about it, whether that's before you go to bed at night, whether that's, after, a difficult day, so then you start thinking, and then you start thinking what the other person is, you think they're thinking, and then all of a sudden it snowballs. It becomes a real issue. I read today someone wrote, there's no such thing as imposter syndrome, and what they were actually trying to say was that, does imposter syndrome actually exist? Or do we just convince ourselves that it's imposter syndrome? And I think there's a fors and against. I think you could actually say there's fors and against. But the power of the mind is powerful. And in a lot of cases where, and not all cases, because you can't say all the time, but in a lot of cases, I think we can actually change what we think and change the outcome.
Yeah, no, I love this. This people who followed me for a while will know I'm all over the book, The Inside Out Revolution, by a well-known American coach called Michael Neal. And he always talks about this, how we, and it's part of a wider thing, but I won't go into the details. Check the book out, or the Audible. But we're often looking at outside things happening to us, impacting our lives, and he isn't wrong. He rightly recognises that isn't the case. If it's outside of your influence of control, if it's being done to you, then how you choose to think about something, even in the most extreme examples, and in the book it does go to extreme, but there are scenarios, and people will have seen these people. There are people diagnosed with terminal illnesses who are happy, relaxed, chilled, okay, not even with it, they're just okay. Now, that seemingly to most people is the worst possible thing that could be happening to you, but these people are okay because they are able to change the way they think. And the way that Michael and a few others explain it nicely is, if you picture a load of clouds going over your head, and the vast majority of those clouds floating over are negative thoughts, you can grab onto the first one you see and you can find a crap thought. There's no doubt about it. But if you look hard enough, wait, and think, okay, that's a crap one, yep, that's a crap one, you just keep ignoring them. They're like, oh, there's something good. You can hang on to that thought and you can immediately shift your thinking. Another example they give is like financial situations where bank balances are just digits, And if you move ones and zeros around, the way you feel can immediately change, which just shows that you're in control of the way you feel and the way you choose to think about things. And this is sometimes difficult for people to grasp. And I give a final little example, which again I think I've stolen from Michael. If you had 100 people going to a cinema to see a film that's never been out before, let's call it Star Wars: A New Hope for something of ease, the first time it's been released, 100 people go in to see that. So they've got no preconceptions because it's never been out before. And if you grab all 100 people right at the end of the movie and get their immediate honest feedback, you'll have close to 100 different experiences. Some people will have loved Darth Vader, some people will have hated Darth Vader, some people will like the music, some people won't like the music, but because there's no preconceived ideas, there's no outside influences, you're just getting their raw appreciation for what they've seen. You'll get their honest feedback and they won't be worried about what people think because it's not going to be shared. But that then highlights, well, they've all seen the same thing.
Yeah.
So 100 people have been in the same room, seeing the same movie, whatever you want to call it, but they will have had different examples of it, as long as it's completely and utterly uninfluenced by other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a really clever but simplistic way of looking at exactly what I think you're saying about how our thoughts can be negative, they can then spiral, they can then get out of control, but in actual fact, nothing of it's real.
No. And that's the bit for me. It's the anxiety is caused by something that hasn't actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it hasn't happened yet, but you're thinking and you're convincing yourself that this is going to happen. And I do think it's in business, in life, I think this is a really powerful one because it's around that you do have the power to change the narrative in your mind. You do have the power to make the change. But you've got to think positively. You know, I know it's a bit of cliche and, you know, everyone said it, you know, glass half empty, glass half full. But the reality is the marker is exactly the same. Where the waterline is the same in both scenarios. Both statements I'm now going to make are correct. I'm going to have a really bad day is correct. I'm going to have a really good day is correct. Whatever I think is correct. So the reality is you can change your mindset by thinking, and I'm not saying, oh yeah, this is all about thinking positively, because it's not even about positive or negative sometimes. Sometimes it's just having the right kind of thoughts. And this is why sometimes, you know, that walk on the beach, for me, always brings me back to just a beautiful place, because the sand beneath my toes, I can hear the wind, I can hear the rustle in the trees, and I can hear, you know, that feeling against my skin, where if I'm in a room, a closed room, I can't feel that. So immediately my mood can be sometimes quite somber. I go outside and I'm at one with the elements, and all of a sudden I start to feel better. And, you know, this podcast is really about, you know, we are what we think we are. So you can change it. You really, really can. And, you know, in a world where anxiety it's a big deal. And I know the medical profession are pulling their hair out because there's not enough people to see people with anxiety. You know, if you're on a waiting list for 6 months to 12 months, the anxiety is only going to get worse. But actually, there are some things that we can do, and it starts with our thinking.
Yeah,
it really does start with our thinking.
Yeah, 100%. Because I mean, it's something that people who follow my podcast last week, no, probably it might have been a month or so. I can never tell. We're crafty. We record these a little ahead of time. But fairly recently, there was an episode where I actually shared that I was under a bit of stress and had been told that I'm probably suffering from anxiety. Not quite from the same direction. For me, it was like just an overwhelmed amount of things, just doing too much, to be perfectly honest. But it just shows that it can happen to anyone. And also you can be oblivious to it. So I think even those people who are thinking negatively and so forth possibly don't even realise they are stressed, because it's incremental things, but as that builds up, I mean, I called it cumulative stress, and I think it's the same. If you're thinking negatively all the time, that one negative thought isn't going to do for you, but over time, multiple ones is obviously going to be really, really negative. And Stephen probably won't know this as well, but my first season of my podcast I ever did was called You're Not Wrong and You're Not Right, because this is something that I really try and drill into people. There's this view now, and I think social media has escalated it, that people are right. Now, if I'm thinking god-awful things, that is still right to me. It might be wrong to every other person in the world,
Yeah.
but ultimately, if that is what seems like the right thing to do to me, and I always talk about this, a really extreme example, if someone in the heat of the moment decides to stab someone, it's quite prevalent at the moment, at that moment, it doesn't matter what you say, that was the right decision for them in that millisecond, for that right second. Maybe seconds leading up to it, it was a bad idea, and seconds afterwards, obviously, absolutely appalling thing that's happened to them. But at that time, their process of thinking had just decided, well, this is the right thing for me to do. And then they have quickly regretted that decision, and it's obviously had massive impacts. But at that point in time, it was right for them. So you can't say someone was wrong, because in the heat of the moment, they made the right call for themselves. And that is a really difficult one for people to swallow and understand. But it doesn't really matter. If you are the majority, it still doesn't matter if the minority believe in something. Their thinking will be what they believe is right. What we have to do is we have to change that thinking process so we never get to those sorts of ridiculous extremities where people's last course of action is to do something like that, or for them to believe in awful hate and things along those lines. We have to challenge their thinking. We can't just go in, and this is what I see all the bloody time at the minute, is you're wrong to think like that, or you're wrong to do this, and all that does is embolden people with incredibly negative thinking to think, well, they're against us. I mean, we've seen it over the pond a lot, don't we? You know, with people, I don't want to get into politics in any great depth, but we're just seeing bad things being said, and then other people arguing against it, and then that emboldening the people who've said bad stuff. That is just not the way to fix things, because in their heads, just as you've talked about, there's thinking going on that actually makes them believe in what they are, what they're listening to, or what they're saying, or what they're speaking. And that's the way that we change things, is we actually get people to be able to challenge that thinking. But if you tell someone they're wrong, I mean, think about a time when you've been told you're wrong. Not you, Stephen, per se, but just as in general as a listener, it's not nice. I don't think you ever enjoy being proven or told you're wrong, even if it's correct. It's not fun. You have to be a really strong charactered individual to be able to handle that and, move forward with it and work with it and so forth. And, some people are really good at that, but, it's normally something you have to learn. So just imagine that in every scenario. If you're going in pointing the finger, I'm talking the general royal you now, not necessarily listeners or anything, but if you're being told you're wrong and you don't think you are, well, then it's not going to change your mind, are you? Just because you say I'm wrong, more likelihood is you're going to be even more entrenched in your beliefs. So I think it goes a lot deeper, and it's weirdly something that in the early days of my coaching was the first thing that I really sort of came across, was how powerful thinking is. Because even here now, I'm saying stuff that made me right, but I'm also not wrong. You can't argue with this, because it's what I think. You can maybe share some stuff. You can potentially provide me with information. I did a post on LinkedIn not that long ago about how I believe expectations are toxic. And someone's come in and very sensibly put in a comment that I should speak to an author of a particular book, and they've tagged them in because they believe expectations are powerful.
Yeah.
I'm willing to have that conversation. I don't know what they're going to say because I haven't read the book, and this is fairly fresh comment, but I'm open to it.
Sure.
Because, if someone can prove to me they're not, brilliant. Because I can start using that as a different way of approaching the challenge of expectations. So absolutely, you are what you think you are is something I can 100% get behind. I think for me, what I'm struggling with in this episode is how to lay a really good platform for people to discover it themselves, because it's quite meaty, isn't it? It's quite a complex issue.
And I guess what I would sort of finish by saying is because you are what you think you are, you have the control. The person that in that moment thought they were right to stab someone, the reality is they had the control not to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's your thinking doesn't make it right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. What you're thinking isn't what's going to happen. So it's really...
Well, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Yeah. So it's having that power to realise that you have the power first and foremost. So what I'm saying to you is you have the power to think differently. So let's use that to think differently, because I think if we try and do that more frequently, anxiety levels will be less so. And it's not going to happen overnight, because what it is, a build-up is a build-up of that acid. It's a build-up because you're thinking it, but you do have the power to reverse it.
Yeah. And I think just because we're only about 15 minutes in, so I'm happy to, because it just made me think of one of the biggest causes of this shift and change for me is social media. Because you can come away from, depending on what you're consuming, you can come away from a half an hour's binge on social media thinking pretty lowly of yourself if you're looking in the wrong areas for you, if that's not helpful for you. You know, I have a daughter, young adult daughter now. Actually, she's head screwed on really well. But there were times when I was genuinely concerned to the sort of stuff that she was looking at and comparing herself and worrying about. But now she speaks very healthily about, you know, weight and things like that. But, you know, that could go a very different way. And if you're constantly consuming stuff that is just going to reinforce that negative thinking, that's the first thing. So talking about, a little earlier in the episode, I was talking about not being sure what to direct people on. I'm not saying come off social media, because that's quite a big ask. It's something I've done, with the exception of LinkedIn, but that's quite a step. But just review what you're consuming. Review maybe how regularly you're consuming. But this is the point I always talk to my clients about, and family and friends, to be honest, is ask yourself this question: is it helpful?
Yeah.
It's not about is it wrong or is it right, but is it helping you? Is it helping the people around you? But most importantly, is it helping you? Is it helpful? Because I think that's probably one area that we could make quite a lot of change for ourselves, is to choose to not consume quite as much or the same types of content that we are if you're feeling low. What do you think?
Yeah, and the reality check, which is anything that you see or consume in that way, it's just a snapshot, and it's just the highlight reel, right?
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because I think a lot more people are being a lot more conscious at showing the difficult moments and what hasn't gone so well. And I think anyone out there listening to this podcast, don't be afraid to show that side of yourself, because actually that might be more helpful than showing all the glossy stuff.
Yep.
And in terms of helping people think differently, that could be the way, because I'm not sat here being a clever clogs that it doesn't affect us what we see, and our anxiety is caused by what we think because of what we've seen.
Yeah.
So I get that. But I think you can limit it, and also you can think about the fact that that's just a snapshot of someone's life, and it's not all of their life. And just like these pictures, you know, I could take a picture right now where from a certain angle I don't look like I'm 10 kilos overweight, but I can take a picture from another angle which will show the truth: I'm currently 10 kilos overweight, and that's because I've got an injury to my knee, so I haven't been able to do the things that I would normally do, but I'm now back on it. But my point is, both those pictures would show a different story.
Yeah.
And this is the thing with social media, and what we've got to think about is actually it's not everything is as amazing as what it seems, and there is such things as smokes and mirrors, which we know can be used. But the thinking thing for me is crucial. You know, if you think differently, the outcome will 100% be different for you. And I'm not an expert in anxiety, but I've worked with enough people now and experienced enough in life to know that you can change that by what you think about 100%.
Yeah, no, I completely and utterly agree with that 100%. And I've seen it happen. You know, for myself personally, but more importantly for clients and friends and family and so forth like that, in both ways, you know. So absolutely 100% agree. Yeah, nothing really more to add than that. It's quite a powerful episode, I think. If you've got any recommendations from me or Stephen, do reach out, and we can certainly let you have some details of things you can consume. Obviously, if you want to have a chat with us, it's a meaty issue, so we're more than happy, as always. We've said if we've triggered something, we feel responsible, so we will happily chat with you and see if we can help in any way, shape or form. So, yeah, that's certainly it from me. Any final words for yourself?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, you are what you think you are. Say that statement over and over again until it registers exactly what it means.
Yeah, really good. Okay, well, I'm not going to say I hope that's a good episode, because I know that was a good episode, so I hope it's helped. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Bye for now.